Good morning. We will be beginning in the next, at most by 7:20, we'll be beginning. Okay, at most by 7:20, we'll be beginning. So if you can tell whoever is not in the group to join, because we'll be beginning shortly. Thank you.
Nilitoka hivyo. Nilitoka wapi? Nalala.
Okay, I think we can start. I think we can start. I hope you can hear me well. Maybe if there are questions from last lecture that we did not get to address, we can give it like 5 minutes. Anyone who has a question from the last lecture can address those questions in 5 minutes, then we proceed. So anyone who still has a question that was not answered, addressed last, because we had quite a number of questions, but we ran out of time. Okay.
Those who had questions, raise your hand.
Okay, so we'll
so that we can unmute you. There's
take
Sheldon.
it that
There's Sheldon. Doc.
hopefully no one has a question about it. So we proceed with what I want us to look at today. We have diseases which
Hello, Doc.
are able to infect both humans and animals. So we have diseases that when an animal has it and it comes in contact with a human being, it's possible that that disease can spread from the sick animal onto the human being. So such a disease is called a zoonotic disease, okay? Or it is a zoonosis. So these are diseases which can pass between animals and humans and even back. When humans have that disease, they can also infect an animal with the same disease. So these diseases that are naturally shared between animals and humans, those are what we call the zoonotic diseases. So they are important because at least in every home that each of us comes from, we keep animals. And animals are such a critical part of our lives as human beings. So as it is, you cannot do possibly without an animal, okay? Because you will need it as food, you need a dog for security, you need a cat in the house to help around with keeping away rats. So it just means that we need to understand what is it that we can do to ensure that the animals we keep and share space with, whenever they are sick or whenever we are sick, we don't spread diseases back and forth. So the first thing now, after understanding what a zoonotic disease is to try and understand how that disease can be spread, how an animal can pass it to you as a human being, and how you as a human being can also infect an animal. So there are three main ways in which these zoonotic diseases can pass from a human being into an animal or from an animal onto human beings. The first way is when there is direct contact with the animals. So you realize that as the human population is getting bigger, the spaces that we live in are getting smaller. Then because of people trying to ape the Western life, even now, people are now keeping pets. So they sleep with their pets, be it a dog, be it a cat. They sleep with it in the house. Unlike in the past when dogs were not living in the house with us. You have people who practice zero grazing, okay? They keep cattle so close to them. So when there is direct contact, when you touch an animal, and if that animal is infected, then chances are very high that as you touch the product, the blood, the urine, any tissue, meat of that animal that was infected, or if the animal bites or scratches you, chances are high that the disease in the animal can actually be transmitted onto you as a human being. So the first way in which a zoonotic disease can spread from an infected animal onto a susceptible human being is through direct contact with the animal. The second way is when you eat or drink contaminated food from that animal. You can either eat meat or you can drink blood or milk from the animal. If the blood or the milk is not boiled, if that milk is raw, yet the animal is infected, then chances that you as a person partaking of that animal product will be infected are very high. If the meat you are eating from the animal is undercooked, okay, then chances that you get the infection are equally very high. Okay. The third way through which a zoonotic disease can spread from a sick animal onto a human being and vice versa is through vectors. Vectors are what can transmit, sort of the vehicle that carries the disease-causing organism from a source to another susceptible host. So if, for example, there is a mosquito involved in biting the sick animal and it comes to bite you, then that mosquito is the vector. If it is a tick that is biting the sick animal, then because of that close contact, the tick also comes and bites you. In that case, that tick is a vector. The tick is what is being used to transmit the infection from the animal onto you as a susceptible host. So the common zoonotic diseases, I'm sure you've heard about rabies, okay? So rabies is mainly caused when an infected animal either bites or scratches. And mostly you have dogs or wild dogs that can spread this disease that we are calling rabies. The causative agent of rabies or the pathogen that causes rabies is a virus. As a human being, if it happens that you are now infected, even the rabies virus has been transmitted to you either through a scratch or a bite of an animal that is already carrying that virus, then you present with the symptoms like fever. Then there is fear of water, call it hydrophobia. Then when it enters the central nervous system, it comes with a lot of confusion and possibly paralysis. Okay. So if you keep a dog, it is important that you have it vaccinated against rabies. Because currently people are keeping dogs either as pets or for security purposes. So no one stops you, but when you keep that dog, for whatever reason, ensure that is vaccinated against rabies. Because if you have a dog and it bites someone, yet it was not vaccinated against rabies, you can pay heavily. But if it's vaccinated against rabies, then all you need to do is just treat the person for the wound. Okay, so you can keep a dog for whatever reasons, but ensure that the dog is vaccinated. So in the event that you have a dog, ensure it's vaccinated. If the dog has bitten you, imekuuma ama imekuscratch, the best way to try and prevent kama hiyo virus haitaingia ndani yako, you immediately wash pahali penye umeumwa na umbwa with soap and water. The thinking is the soap will disrupt the virus, then iitoe. Okay, because it's an enveloped virus. So soap will disrupt the envelope on the virus. Kimbia hospitali so that you can be given the post-exposure prophylaxis ama post-exposure treatment. Okay, so if the dog is vaccinated, the better. Just treat the wound. If the dog is not vaccinated, or if you are not sure if the dog is vaccinated, quickly wash where the dog has bitten you with the soap and water, a lot of water. Then rush to hospital so that you get the post-exposure prophylaxis for rabies. Most of you lazima umeambiwa na mtu kwamba nimeenda hospitali nikaambiwa niko na brucellosis. So brucellosis is another zoonotic disease. It is caused by a bacteria, okay, the Brucella bacteria. And it's spread mainly when you are using an animal product. Either you are using raw milk or you are eating meat that is undercooked, or you are handling animals that are infected. So mostly ukienda hospitali na wakwambia uko na brucellosis, huwa unaambiwa you avoid animal products for a period of time. Okay? So some of the signs kwamba uko na brucellosis, you'll have fever yenye iko on and off. Then there will be joint and muscle pain. Alafu there will be some extreme tiredness. Utakaa ni kama umechoka. So the people who are at risk ya brucellosis ni wale watu wenye wanakuja in contact na the animal products which are raw. So for example, if you are a farmer or if you work in a butchery, okay? Or if you are a pastoralist, wale watu wanazunguka na wanalisha wanyama wakizunguka. So it just means that by virtue of what these people do, it puts them at risk of brucellosis. So to prevent brucellosis, ni unajaribu kabisa, kabla utumie maziwa, you boil it. Kabla ukule nyama, unahakikisha kwamba hiyo nyama imepikwa vizuri. Because the bacteria which causes brucellosis will be in the animal product, will be either in the milk or in the meat. So if you boil the milk, you kill the bacteria. If you cook the meat well, you also kill the bacteria. Then when you are handling animals, just ensure that you avoid direct contact. How do you do that? You put on gloves. Okay, you put on gloves when you are handling animals. The next zoonotic disease that is common in Kenya is what we call the Rift Valley fever. That one is also caused by a virus, and it is spread by mosquito bites and when you come in contact with blood from an infected animal. So if the animal has Rift Valley fever, then you come in contact with its blood. As a person, chances kwamba utapata huu ugonjwa zinaongezeka. So if you are suffering from Rift Valley fever, what you present with, the symptoms, utakuwa na fever, you'll have weaknesses, alafu utasikia saa ingine damu, you bleed. Okay, you bleed from all openings, mouth, nose. Then mara mingi you will suffer liver damage. Okay, so Rift Valley fever the outbreak sio kila wakati, but huwa inafanyika mara mingi kama kuna a lot of rains, because mosquitoes now increase. Okay, so baada ya mvua mosquitoes zitakuwa nyingi, And now mosquitoes are the vectors of this particular disease. So if you have more vectors, chances are that they can now move and spread the disease quickly. So how to prevent this disease, the Rift Valley fever? You try and avoid mosquito bites. How do you do that? You use nets when sleeping, ama utumie repellent, ujipake repellent. Then if you suspect there's an animal which is sick, avoid handling it. Okay, unless kama umevaa gloves or any protection vizuri, so that as you handle that animal, you don't come in contact with any of its blood or any secretion from it. Watu wengi kwenyu labda mmesikia ugonjwa ambayo inaitwa anthrax. Okay. Anthrax inasababishwa na a bacteria which we call Bacillus anthracis. This bacteria is spread when there is contact with an infected animal or when you eat meat that is contaminated, which means the animal had that bacteria and you eat it. The other alternative, this bacteria, the Bacillus anthracis, inaweza patikana kwa udongo. So you can inhale the spores whenever there is wind blowing and this bacteria iko kwa udongo, you can easily inhale the spores. Okay. So preventing anthrax, avoid eating meat from dead animals. Okay. Where we come from, ukipata an animal imekufa, people will want to say, let's eat it, tusiharibu chakula. But in such cases, ukikula hiyo nyama na haijulikani nini imeua that animal, if it is anthrax, if that animal died from anthrax, then chances are very high kwamba munaweza pata huo ugonjwa wa anthrax. Okay. So don't eat meat from animals which died mysteriously. Then for such animals, dispose those animal carcasses properly. Usichukue tu na uende uzike in shallow graves. What is recommended, chukua hiyo nyama, choma. Sio kuchoma ya kukula, washa moto kabisa so that you burn it. The thing is, if the animal died from anthrax, burning that carcass kills the bacteria. Okay, but if you bury that animal in the soil, remember, the Bacillus anthracis also survives in the soil. So if you just bury it in the soil, chances are that you are infecting the soil even more. So the recommendation is burn that carcass, so that in the process of burning, you are also killing the causative agent. The good news for anthrax ni kwamba there is a vaccine. Okay, so whenever you have your animals, you can have them be vaccinated against anthrax. Okay. So the causes of these zoonotic diseases, we've seen how they can be transmitted. We've seen the examples of some of these zoonotic diseases, but what exactly causes them? Okay. So these zoonotic diseases can happen when there are three things that are working together. So if there is the germs that cause that disease, then if there is an animal, alafu, if there is a human being. So we need those three things. There is a pathogen or the germs that cause the disease. There is an animal, then there are a human being. All these three, if they happen to be in a shared environment. So if the three meet, if the pathogen meets an animal, then this animal meets a human being. So the animal having met the pathogen means that animal is infected. So when the infected animal meets or comes in contact with a human being, then chances are very high that the pathogen or the disease-causing microorganism will be transmitted from the animal into the human being. So when those three things meet in a shared environment, chances are very high kwamba there will be transmission of that particular disease from the animal onto the human being. So we've talked of the germs. We call them pathogens in biology. So the pathogen is anything that when you have it will cause a disease in your body. If it is a bacteria, if it is a virus, if it is a parasite, that is a pathogen, okay? So there are various types of pathogens. You have, for example, viruses, okay? Then you have bacteria, and then you have parasites, alafu you have fungi. Okay, so all those four, they are pathogens and they can cause diseases within our bodies. The second thing is an animal reservoir. So an animal reservoir, this refers to an animal that can carry a pathogen, but that animal carrying the pathogen will not appear sick. So the animal is just behaving like a store for the pathogen. The pathogen does not make the animal sick, but that animal carries the pathogen. Okay, so it is a reservoir. It is storing the pathogen. Okay, but it does not display any symptom for you to know that this animal has this particular pathogen. The common animal reservoirs and their respective diseases, you might have seen bats. Okay, bats, they carry viruses. Example of such a virus is the Ebola virus. Okay, so in places where you have Ebola virus outbreaks, the reservoir for the Ebola virus are the bats. Rodents, like rats and mice, they are also reservoirs for some diseases like plague. Okay. Then cows, goats, and sheep, they give milk, and we also use their meat. So these livestock that I've mentioned, cows, goats, sheep, they carry the pathogen that causes brucellosis, but they don't show the symptoms. So it means they are a reservoir. Okay. So even if an animal looks healthy, when you look at an animal, you don't see any symptom. If that animal has the pathogen inside it, it will still infect humans with that pathogen. Okay. So when you are handling an animal, it means you have to be careful because you don't expect the symptoms of that particular disease to be shown, given that that animal might be a reservoir animal for that particular pathogen. The environmental factors which enhance the occurrence of a zoonotic disease. Whenever there is something that has happened or has changed in our environment, which makes it easy for the animals and human beings to meet, that is a factor in the environment that can enhance the occurrence of a zoonotic disease. So if, for example, within the environment, there is deforestation, trees are being cut down, most animals will live in forests. So when we cut down trees, it means the animals are losing their homes. Once the animals lose their homes, then they'll have no alternative. Okay? Because they are losing where they were living. So they begin to roam, they begin to walk around. Then that will mean they now begin to come into closer contact with people. If those animals have a pathogen, have a disease-causing microorganism, then chances are very high that as they come in contact with people, they will infect them. Another environmental factor is if there is an expansion in the farming zones. So mostly when people expand their farming zones, they expand into areas that other people are not using. You cannot expand into somebody's other farm, but you will expand it into a forest, for example, or close to a forest. So as you do that, then as the animals now begin to come, because you've gone and begin to plant where they were living. So as you go there to plant, then you enhance chances that you yourself as a human being, the livestock you keep, and the wildlife will mix more because you've expanded your farming region into a home where the animals were living. So you've meant that more mixing between you and the animals will occur. With that mixing, with that enhanced mixing, chances that the zoonotic disease will now spread zitakuwa zimeongezeka. The other thing that can cause an increase in the zoonotic diseases is what we are experiencing now, tunaita climate change. Climate change has brought changes in the rainfall and temperature patterns. So we currently have a world or a globe that is becoming hotter. Whenever it becomes hotter, it means maji inapunguka. Okay? Maji ikipunguka, then forests and grass also begin to reduce. Then with that, the animals begin to lose their homes. Okay? So then an interaction between animals and humans will increase. Equally, because of climate change, we've seen a spread and an increase in some insects. There have been reports, for example, that mosquitoes are now in areas where they were never been. So in areas that mosquitoes were not there, it means mosquitoes were not spreading diseases there. But now that mosquitoes are there, the range of mosquitoes imeongezeka as a result of the change in the climate. So as the mosquito range increases, as the mosquitoes go into areas that they've never been associated with, they increase chances that they can cause diseases. They can spread these diseases into such areas. Another factor within still the environmental context is human activities. What is it that humans do? Okay, so the behavior of humans plays a big role in the spread of zoonotic diseases. For example, if as a human being you eat bushmeat, okay, when you hunt wild animals, then ukipata unakula. The wild animal has not been tested. Chances that it is coming from the wild, iko na ugonjwa, is very high. So by eating this bushmeat, by eating these wild animals, you increase the risk of exposing yourself to new zoonotic diseases. The other thing is poor hygiene. If, for example, there is dirty water which you are using, within that water, by virtue of it being dirty means chances kwamba there is a pathogen in the water are very high. So if you use water that is dirty, you increase the probability that you can get infected. When there is poor waste disposal, okay, because the pathogens that cause disease will thrive in the waste. So if you are not disposing the waste properly, then you are just enhancing areas that the pathogens can now thrive. Okay. Still on human activities, there is a concept of travel and trade. So when people and animals move from one place to another, chances that they move with the diseases, they move with the pathogens is very high. When you compare the patterns of spread between people and the diseases, is almost the same. Think of COVID. COVID was always being moved around by people because the disease or the pathogen cannot move on its own. Okay, so whenever people move, whenever people travel, and if they are traveling for trade, at times they trade, they go and sell animals. So chances that they are moving with an animal that is infected are very high. So as they take this animal to a new place, kuna uwezekano kwamba that animal is going to introduce a disease in that new place. Okay. So what are the risk factors for these zoonotic diseases? So when we talk of a risk factor, this is just anything that increases the likelihood that a zoonotic disease can actually occur. Okay. So for the sake of zoonosis or zoonotic diseases, a risk factor is anything that will make it easier for the disease to move from animals into humans. So anything that will make it easier that the disease can be transmitted from an infected animal into a human being, then that is what we are calling a risk factor. One of these risk factors is the occupation or the job that someone is doing. If the job you have brings you close either to animals or to animal products, then it means the risk for you to be infected by a pathogen that the animal carries is elevated. For example, if you are a farmer and you are dealing in animals, lazima utaguza those animals almost on a daily basis. That increases chances kwamba if the animal has a disease, you can easily be infected. If you are someone who deals in treating the sick animals, because as a veterinarian utaitwa kwenda kutibu hawa wanyama kama ni wagonjwa. So you are going to touch the animal, and you're not just touching an animal, you are touching a sick animal. So chances that you can be infected are very high. Then if you work in a butchery, because you always come in contact with the meat and blood, those are products from animals. If it happens that the animal from which the meat or the blood has come from was infected, then by virtue of your job or your occupation, working in a butchery, that elevates the level of risk of infection. So if there is more contact with the animals, then there is a higher risk for infection from zoonotic diseases. The second risk factor is where you live. So if it happens that you live close to animals or close to wildlife, that in a way will increase chances that you can be exposed. Okay. So for example, if you live in a rural area, because people in rural areas, that's where animals are kept, more animals are kept. If you come from a pastoralist community, pastoralists, they keep animals and they move around with them. So that enhances contact between humans and animals. Then if it also happens that you live near a forest or you live near a wildlife sanctuary, by virtue of being close to a forest, animals live in forests. If you are living close to a wildlife sanctuary, then chances that you can come in contact with these animals are high. Okay, so the closer you live with animals, the easier it is for the disease to be spread. The other risk factor is what you eat. Okay, so your dietary habits. Depending on what you eat, the food that you eat can possibly carry some of these diseases. If, for example, you are drinking raw milk, chances are high that if the animal that gave that milk had the infection, you also will be infected. If it happens, for example, that you are eating meat which is undercooked, the meat was not cooked properly, chances that you get the infection will still be fairly high. Then if it happens that you are eating bushmeat, no one has inspected the animal that you've hunted and killed, yet you go ahead and eat. Chances are that you can easily be infected as a result. So in terms of what you eat, if the food is not safe, then that comes with a higher risk of infection. Okay, if the food you are eating is not safe, then it comes with a higher risk of infection. The fourth risk factor is the environment. Okay, if there is any change in the environment, such a change might in a way increase chances that disease will actually spread. For example, if you are deforesting, you are cutting down forests, that just means that you'll be displacing animals from their homes. So once you displace these animals, they will move closer to people. Okay. The other example is if there is climate change, because with the climate change, we've seen a massive increase in vectors. So once vectors have increased, there are more ticks, there are more mosquitoes. Chances that now these vectors can actually spread the disease are also very high. Then the last risk factor is just the living conditions. Okay. So if you live in fairly poor living conditions, then it is more difficult to either prevent or treat the disease. With poor living conditions, we mean there is poor sanitation. Then there is limited access to hospitals or healthcare. Alafu, because it's a poor living condition and there is limited access to hospitals and healthcare, as you expect, then we might not have enough vaccines. So with that, it will be easy for the disease to spread. And once the disease has occurred, because there is limited access to hospitals and healthcare, and there were no vaccines to prevent, so it means the disease will spread easily without being treated. Okay. So if you are living in poor conditions, then you are highly vulnerable to some of these zoonotic diseases. Okay. So those are the risk factors. But now, how can we prevent and control these zoonotic diseases? We've seen that three things are critical for the occurrence of zoonotic diseases. You need a pathogen, you need an animal, and you need human beings. If these three come in contact in a common environment, then the disease will not only occur, but it will be transmitted. So for us to stop these zoonotic diseases, then we must protect people, we must protect animals, and we must protect also the environment. If these three are protected, then we can easily stop the occurrence and spread of these zoonotic diseases. So by protecting these three, this has come to be referred to as the One Health approach. When you deal with people, you deal with animals, and you deal with the environment. That is the One Health approach, because all these three are connected. Okay, you interact with the animals, then there is a common environment. So all of us, human beings, animals, and the environment, we are all connected. If the human being is unhealthy, then the disease can spread either from the human being into the animal or from the human being into the environment. Then once the disease or the pathogen is in the environment, it can easily now infect the animal. Okay? So the same thing, if the animal is sick, that disease can get into the human being or it can get into the environment. We talked about anthrax being spread through spores because anthrax, the Bacillus anthracis, inaweza ikaishi kwa udongo. So by surviving kwa udongo, it just means it has now infected the environment. So the way to prevent these zoonotic diseases is, one, by being careful with animals. So if the animal is sick, let's avoid touching it if we don't have gloves. Okay. Then two, avoid coming into direct contact with wild animals because you don't know the health status of the wild animal. So if you really have to touch an animal, then wash your hands once you are done handling that animal. Because you don't know, we saw that animals can be reservoirs. The animal might not be presenting with any symptom, but in reality, that animal could be having the pathogen in it. Then when you are keeping animals, just ensure that you keep animals that are healthy. How do you ensure you keep them healthy? Vaccinate them. By vaccinating, it means you are preventing the animals from being sick or from harboring the pathogen as a reservoir. If it happens that the animal is sick, ensure that you treat it early. So treat the sick animals early enough. Okay? Because if you have healthy animals, when these animals come into contact with the human beings will remain safe. But once the animals are not healthy, then they become a health risk to the human beings that they come in contact with. The third way to protect the occurrence of these zoonosis is eating food that is safe. If you have to eat meat, cook it well. Kama ni maziwa unataka kukunywa, boil it. If it is water that you want to drink or use, ensure that that water is clean. Okay? The other way to prevent the occurrence of these zoonotic diseases is by ensuring that we control insects and we keep our immediate environment clean. we've seen that mosquitoes and ticks, for example, they can be vectors for some of these diseases. So if we control the contact that we have with mosquitoes, with ticks, then it means even if the mosquitoes or the ticks are infected, we don't have contact with them, so they cannot transmit or infect us. When we remove stagnant water, when we ensure that our environment is clean, then we are removing places where pathogens can thrive. We are also removing places where these vectors can also thrive. So once we decrease the presence of pathogens, we decrease the presence of vectors, and we disrupt the occurrence of direct contact between a vector and human beings, then chances that transmission of the disease will occur will be very minimal. The fifth way to prevent zoonotic diseases is you act fast when there is a problem. When you think you've been exposed, umeumwa na umbwa, go to hospital early, okay? Go to hospital early. So you act fast. When you notice that animals are dying and you don't really know what is happening, you report that so that they can come and check what is it that is killing those animals. Because it could be there is a pathogen within. So once the veterinarians come, they'll be able to detect the cause of death. Then now you can be in a position to prevent yourselves. Okay? So whenever there is a problem, always seek treatment quickly. Then in so doing, you will ensure that even if you had been exposed, you are in a position to treat yourself early, and that will lead to saving a lot of lives. Okay? That was about prevention. But in the event that you are infected, how is treatment of these zoonotic diseases made possible? So with zoonotic diseases, there is no single treatment. So the way you are treated for brucellosis, for example, is different from the way you are treated for anthrax or Rift Valley fever. So the treatment will depend on the type of pathogen. Then how severe is the illness and how early the patient is seeking treatment. So the simplest way for any better recovery is you always have to seek early treatment. Okay, so the earlier you seek treatment, the better for you to recover from some of these zoonotic diseases. So the basic steps in the treatment of zoonotic diseases is go for diagnosis. Find out what disease you are suffering from. So before treatment can be initiated, ukienda hospitalini mara mingi wanakwambia enda lab ndio nijue shida ni nini. So what they are trying to do at that point, they are just trying to find out what is it that is actually in your body. So you go for diagnosis. So with that, you just try to know what disease the patient has. Then once you've known that, it's now easier for the treatment to be done. It is important that diagnosis is made because through diagnosis, the healthcare provider is able to avoid giving out wrong treatment to the patient. Okay. If you've not been taken to the lab, they can treat you for malaria na kumbe uko na pneumonia. Okay. So it's important that diagnosis is done so that the correct disease is treated, and by so doing, you are given the right medicine. So the first step is diagnosis. Then after that, you are now able to use the right medicine. So after diagnosis, the type of disease, the type of pathogen that you as a person or the patient has will be known. Then, because treatment for the zoonotic disease depends on the pathogen, then it means now that the pathogen in the patient is known, the right medicine will be given. Okay. Then the third way is to manage symptoms. Some of these diseases come with the symptoms. There will be fever, there will be pain. Okay. So there now has to be a way that the health personnel sasa waanze kujaribu kusaidia kupunguza. Uko unameza dawa ndio, but wakusaidie pia kupunguza. Kama ni uchungu wapunguze, kama ni fever wajaribu kucontrol. Okay? If breathing is a problem, they can help with oxygen supply. So what they are doing at that particular point, wamekupatia dawa ya kutibu the pathogen, but they are also trying to help in dealing with the particular symptom that you are presenting with as a patient. Okay. So by doing that, by managing the symptoms, the healthcare personnel, they will be supporting the body while the body is fighting the disease. Okay. So through medicine, the body is helped to fight the disease. But by managing the symptom that is presenting, managing the pain, managing the fever, now the healthcare personnel will be helping to support the body as the body fights the disease. After all these three, another important thing is to prevent the disease after exposure. Okay. So whatever source that the disease came from, okay, it's important that now you go back and try to ask yourself, how do I ensure that the source of this particular disease does not continue to be present? So you have to prevent further after the exposure. Okay. Then if there are severe cases, kama rabies, ukichelewa kwenda hospitalini, watu wengi hata huwa wanaharibika kichwa. Okay. So if it's happened that maybe there was a delay, then most likely the zoonotic disease can result in a severe case. If it is a severe case, then you have to be taken to hospital for care. Okay. So at times, there could be, for example, difficulty in breathing. At times, pia kunaweza kuwa hata na organ failure. Remember with the Rift Valley fever, there is massive bleeding. Okay. So with that, you need some emergency care. Uende hospitali because you are bleeding too much, you need blood transfusion. Okay. So itabidi sasa you go and be hospitalized so that you are given the specialized care in the case that some of these zoonotic diseases are at very serious levels. Okay. So the occurrence of zoonotic diseases is a factor of the environment largely. And there is something that we are currently experiencing, hii ambayo tunaita climate change. So what is likely to happen to these zoonotic diseases in the face of the current climate change scenario? Okay. So the truth is, as we continue to experience climate change and its effects, we are likely to have more zoonotic diseases, and the zoonotic diseases that we currently have are likely to spread even more easily. That is mainly because climate change has led to various changes in the homes of animals, has increased the ranges of vectors as insects, and it has made human beings to behave differently, okay, in response to the changes in the climate. So maybe you might be asking yourself that what exactly is this climate change? So climate change is just a long-term variation or a long-term change in both temperature and weather patterns. Okay. So if currently we are now having higher temperatures, we are having irregular rainfall patterns, then we are having more floods and more droughts. So when we have droughts, they are severe. When we have rains, they lead into severe floods. Okay. So these changes, they will lead to the disturbance of what was usually a normal balance between humans, animals, and the environment. When there are higher temperatures, inapunguza the amount of water that is available. Okay, that is affecting the environment. It's also affecting animals because animals were relying on water. For there to be grass, there must be enough amount of water. But because of high temperatures, there is a reduction in the water availability. Okay, so climate change will most likely, as we've said, lead to an increase and spread of these zoonotic diseases. So how does this happen? Through climate change, animals are made to move closer to human beings, mainly because forests are being destroyed. Okay, because as human beings destroy forests, then as weather patterns lead to a decline, a shrinking of the forest ecosystems, then animals will lose their homes. Once animals have lost their homes and the associated pasture, they move into farms and villages. That is now where people are. So if those animals have pathogens with them, as they come into close contact with the people in the villages, chances that zoonotic diseases will be spread are very high. Due to climate change, we have now more insects, and these insects are spreading into areas that they never were present in. As the insects spread, these insects are vectors. They are the ones that spread the diseases. So as they spread into areas that they were never there, as these vectors increase in numbers, then chances that the pathogens that these insects carry will also be spreading will also be very high. Then extreme weather, because with the climate change, there is a change in the weather patterns. Extreme weather in these cases, we've seen that there are either floods or droughts. So in the cases of flooding, for example, we'll have dirty water moving around. Dirty water will be spreading bacteria. And then people will get infected with the bacteria that is present in the dirty water. In the case of drought, more animals will die. Because animals are dying, most people might want to eat meat from these dead animals. Even if they don't eat, the carcass of the animals will pollute the environment. If the animal had anthrax na imekufa, the Bacillus anthracis, the spores zitaenda kwa udongo. Then now the environment is polluted. The environment is infected. So then people are more easily to be infected because the environment has been polluted. Okay. Due to climate change as well, food and water becomes unsafe. Okay. So as a result of climate change, chances that there will be less food ni real. Okay. As a result of the change in the weather patterns, unaona kwamba mavuno inapunguka. When food is less, then people have to find alternative sources of food. And at times, that leads them to bushmeat. When people eat bushmeat, chances kwamba watapata infection ziko juu. Due to climate change, tumeona kwamba kuna flooding, contaminated water. So if people use contaminated water, they are likely to be infected. Okay. So climate change in a way will just increase the occurrence of zoonotic diseases. Okay. So because we will have effects of climate change with us, the only way we can deal with, so we have climate change and we still have animals. Okay. So how can we now try to reduce, how can we mitigate the impact that this climate change is likely to have, either on the occurrence or spread of these zoonotic diseases? Okay. So as we said in the One Health approach, we must work together, and not just work together, but work together early enough. So we need to work together early enough to protect people, to protect animals, and to protect the environment. If people are not infected, chances that the animals will be infected is very low. If people are not infected, chances that the environment will be infected is very low, and vice versa. So we must work together. Okay. So it means people who deal with human health, then people who deal with animal health, then the environmental experts, they all must work together. Okay. So that the people in the environment can sense something. People who the veterinarians can also have a part to play in this, and those dealing with human health will also play their part, because those dealing with human health will ensure that humans are healthy. The veterinarians will ensure that animals are healthy. Then the environmental experts will ensure that the environment is healthy. So all of them not just need to work together, but they need to work together early. If the environmental experts realize that animals are dying within the environment, they need to inform the veterinarians. Then the veterinarians now need to work hand in hand with the doctors, so that whatever they are seeing in animals can also be checked to see if it's present in humans. Because if animals are infected, chances that humans will also be infected are very high. Okay. So the second bit with the mitigation ni kwamba we need surveillance and early warning systems. Surveillance is watching around for the disease before the disease actually begins to spread. So once the disease is detected mapema, okay, we need to come up with ways to monitor animals and human health, so that once you notice kwamba there is a particular animal in a present with the funny symptoms, they have to swing in early and treat that animal. Okay. So there has to be surveillance, which is monitoring. Alafu early warning detection. Kama kuna any warning yenye inapatikana na ikipatikana mapema, nyinyi mnapenda kusema mapema ndio best. Okay? So ikipatikana mapema, itaweza kutibiwa mapema, alafu it will not spread. Okay? So once you detect it early, then you can stop it. How do you detect it early? If you are doing surveillance. Okay? The other thing we need to do so that we can mitigate, we can deal with the effects of climate change with respect to zoonotic diseases, we need to educate the community. Okay, so we need to tell people, sababu watu in the villages, watu wako na wanyama, they keep animals. People live close to forests. So we need to educate them. We need to tell them so that they can know how do they protect themselves. Okay, we need to teach communities, we need to educate communities the need to avoid coming into direct contact with wild animals, the need and the importance to practice good hygiene. Then we also need to educate communities wajue kwamba before you eat any meat, at least have someone to come and inspect. Okay, so the people back home, you just don't slaughter an animal and eat. Have someone to come and inspect. That's why we have butcheries zenye ukienda huko unaona nyama imekuwa inspected. That helps a lot kuhakikisha kwamba hiyo nyama haina infection, so people will not be at a risk wakikula hiyo nyama. So through community education, knowledge will actually help to prevent infection. When people are educated, when people know the risks, then they will likely avoid those risks, and in return, we will not have infections. We know, for example, that climate change and its impacts bado ziko tu. So we just now need to ensure that there is a development, there is building of strong systems that are climate resilient, okay? So you need to prepare communities, for example, in the case of floods, in the case of droughts, how do you ensure that the community is resilient? Haitaumia because of flooding, haitaumia because of drought, okay? So you can, for example, improve the water supply and water sanitation levels, okay? You can also come up with a way to ensure that in the case of flooding, people are protected. Huwa unaona in areas that are prone to floods, kama Budalangi ama wapi, unaona watu wa engineers wameenda huko kubuild. The engineers have gone there to build dikes. So by doing that, you are now ensuring that the community is protected from effects of flooding. Okay. Then also, you can try and improve the farming methods. So if people, for example, in an area experience frequent droughts, encourage them to plant crops that mature in a very short time before the drought occurs. Or encourage them to plant crops that are drought resilient. People who are in flood-prone areas, let them, for example, plant rice instead of maize. Okay, so you tell them to come up with improved farming methods as a reality on the type of environment that they are exposed to. So when you prepare people for disasters, then in a way, you will help to ensure that the occurrence of diseases is actually prevented. Then kitu ya mwisho ambayo ni ya muhimu in the mitigation ni vaccinate animals and also improve animal health. Animals that are vaccinated will not infect human beings even if they came in contact with them. Okay? Then when you improved animal health, ni kwamba if the animal is sick, it will be treated. If the animal is treated, it will not be a health risk to the humans that it is coming into contact with. Okay, so let's vaccinate livestock. Let's vaccinate the pets that we keep. Okay, then because agriculture is largely devolved now, county governments need to ensure that there is provision of sufficient qualified veterinary services. By doing that, then the health of livestock will be guaranteed, will be safeguarded. Once the livestock is healthy, we will reduce the risk of disease in human beings and in the environment. Okay. Then there is need for strong policies and cooperation. Not one country, not one county can counter the effects of climate change. Many animals are moving from one county to another. Many animals are moving, for example, from Kenya to Tanzania, from Kenya to Uganda. So there need to be regional cooperation, there need to be laws and policies to help to ensure that in case there is an outbreak, how do these counties and countries that are bordering each other, how do they jointly react? How do they respond jointly in case of an emergency? Kama kuna ugonjwa Uganda kwa mfano, na watu wameenda kuchunga huko ng'ombe ama mbuzi ama kondoo, how does the Ugandan government respond? How does the Kenyan government respond also? So they need to come up with policies to ensure that even as the regions continue to be interrelated, that interrelationship isilete a health risk. Okay. So there is need that counties and national governments come up with policies and come up with areas of common cooperation to ensure that, because the effect of climate change is not just about Kenya, it's not just about Uganda, it's about the entire world. So it means all countries need to come up with a policy. All countries need to cooperate. For county governments, if there is a zoonotic disease, for example, in Bungoma, ama in Busia, yet kuna soko yenye watu wanaenda kuuza huku ng'ombe, kuku, wakirudisha huku. How do you come up with a policy? How do you cooperate as county governments to ensure that mifugo ambayo inauzwa Mayanja na next itapelekwa Kocholia. Kocholia is in Busia, Mayanja is in Bungoma, for example. Then next watapeleka Kitale. Okay? How do you ensure that the diseases that these animals are possibly carrying does not spread? And if it spreads, can you deploy, for example, veterinary officers to be present on the market centers when people are now coming with the animals? Can these veterinary officers, for example, charge even 10 or 20 shillings just to ensure that the animal is treated or vaccinated? Okay. So by doing that, then the county governments will help to control not only the occurrence, but the spread of these zoonotic diseases. Remember, the zoonotic disease inaumiza animals, given that as human beings, we rely on the animals. If the animals die, then most people keep their money in animals. So if you've taken a loan and bought a cow or a sheep, ikikufa pesa yako imeenda. Okay? So it is about livelihood, but also it is about health. So by keeping the animal healthy, your livelihood is guaranteed and also your health is guaranteed. So there has to be cooperation. There has to be policies that help in ensuring that everything works better. Okay, I think that is the end of the zoonotic disease thing. So, we have any question about it? If there is a question about it, please proceed and ask. Okay, so no question. It means we are okay. I was hoping that this will be our last lecture, but sadly not. Okay, we will meet on Monday for the very, very last lecture. Okay, you have said Ebola is carried by bats. How can it be spread to humans? Okay, so bats are reservoirs for the Ebola virus. So if the bat is a reservoir and there are places, for example, in I've been in areas in northern Turkana where bats and people are living virtually in the same place. Okay. So it means if the bats have the Ebola virus, then such people are at risk because the bats are present. People are also present in that particular environment. So if the bat has the virus, then chances that there is contact between these two is very high. In most of these arid and semi-arid areas, we know that bats are nocturnal, but people are also more active at night. So people walk at night. Okay. So by that, it means then there is enhanced contact between the bats and people. Okay. So the presence of viruses, the Ebola virus in bats, increases the risk that that virus can actually spill over into the human population. We've been lucky, for example, that bats in Kenya, we've not had serious Ebola issues. But when you go to areas where there have been serious Ebola issues, then there are vectors that now lead to the movement of the Ebola virus from these animal, the bats which are reservoirs into the susceptible human beings. Okay. Kuna wale wamebeba mkono. I don't know if you can type or if the audio team, if they're in, they can unmute you.
Doc. Hello, Doc. Those who are muted, unmute. Sheldon.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Doc.
Sheldon, just type, maybe.
I have unmuted them.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Doc, once again.
Yes, morning.
Thank you. Doc, I have a question. My concern is at cancer. I don't know if I can just go ahead and post
Just
it here.
type, guys. If you can't unmute yourself, just type.
It's okay. Now, Doc, the first question that I have on cancer, before I go to the question, allow me to disagree with the concept of spontaneous theory. That is the concept telling us that living organism can develop from non-cellular livings. And together in that direction, I also bring into your concerns that in women, I'm discussing about cancer kindly. In women, we have 28 life cycles.
Yeah, someone is saying, kumbe mosquitoes transmit only malaria. Yes, that's true. Mosquitoes transmit many other diseases.
Sheldon.
Can I continue, please?
Yes, Sheldon.
Which advice can I give to those villagers that likes to rush for dead animals? Advise them not to eat. Okay? Advise them not to eat because if you don't know what killed the animal, assume that animal died from, for example, anthrax. You eat that animal, you also suffer from the same disease. Okay? Cat ni lini? Okay, we'll have a cat. Don't worry, Dorothy. We'll have a cat. Online cat. Okay. Is it true that when cattle are kept near homestead, they can spread disease? If depending on now which disease the cattle have. In zero grazing, unapata kuna watu wameweka hizo ng'ombe hata ndani ya nyumba. Remember the Rift Valley fever, inashika hata ng'ombe, inashika mbuzi, inashika kondoo. Okay? So if the animals have the Rift Valley fever, then there are mosquitoes. The mosquitoes can bite the animal and it can also bite the human being. So then through that, they can now transmit the infection. We've seen that cattle are a reservoir for the brucella causing agent, the agent that causes brucellosis. So if you are in direct contact with the cattle, then that cattle has the brucellosis pathogen, chances are very high that you will get the infection. Okay. A very, very good question. Does Rift Valley fever only affect those who live in Rift Valley? No, Meshach, it does not. It affects anybody. It's called Rift Valley fever because ilianzia Rift Valley. Okay. But even in Western Kenya, hiyo fever iko. Okay. So it began in the Rift Valley, but it was spread. Whatever spreads the Rift Valley fever virus are mosquitoes. So when the range of mosquitoes increases, then the spread of that virus also increases. You said that when the dog bites you, use soap. Which kind? No, you just wash with soap, any soap actually, with a lot of water. Then is there a need to go to hospital? Yes, there is need. Okay. So soap and water is just an emergency. The dog, the suspicion ni kwamba the dog might not have been vaccinated against rabies. So when you wash with the soap, the rabies virus, we say it has an envelope. So soap, it disrupt the envelope. You remember with COVID, walikuwa wanasema you wash your hands with soap and water. Soap kazi yake is to disrupt the envelope ya hiyo virus. Once the envelope is disrupted, ni kama umeweka barua kwa bahasha. Ukishararua hiyo bahasha, the letter is no longer protected. Okay. So what you are doing with the soap is just to destroy the covering of the virus. Then you expose it. Okay. So wash with soap and water and a lot of water. Then after that, go to hospital. Hiyo tu ni emergency. Just to reduce chances kwamba hiyo virus itaingia ndani yako. Okay. But after that, go to hospital, upatiwe medication. Recently, I was at a certain ceremony and we evidenced a dead chicken, but one of the cooks asked for it to go and feed her pig. But we heard that she went and ate. Okay. Well, if they don't know what killed the chicken, then even the pig will be at risk. Okay? Even the pig will be at risk. I used to drink unboiled milk when I was very young. So do I need to go for checkup? Well, when you are very young and you are no longer young, so you just need to stop drinking unboiled or fresh milk. Okay. A very, very good concern. People should be serious. Out of 3,000 students, only 800 are attending. The good thing is for the CAT, all of them will need to do it. So wale 3,000 watajitokeza siku ya CAT. Tena wale 3,000 wote watajitokeza siku ya mtihani. Okay? So we can no longer talk about attendance. Whoever wants to attend, they come. Whoever does not want to attend, wacha tufanye namna gani? Tukutane kwa mtihani. My experience is always kuna wale watu wenye wataanza kusema kumbe ningekuwa serious, because I'm telling you for free, it will not be as easy as you think. Okay? So for those who attend classes, don't worry, it will be easy. But kwa wale hawakuji class anasema nitasoma notes, wacha tukutane kwa mtihani, my friends. I've taught this unit for some time. So let's meet in the exam. Na utaona tofauti ya wewe mwenye unakuja class na ule mwenye anangoja notes. Okay? So don't worry. Let people enjoy whatever they think they are enjoying. But let's meet in the what? Let's begin with the CAT. Hapo ndio tofauti utaona ikijitokeza. Then sasa final tukutane kwa mtihani. Kwa wale mnakuja class, don't worry. It will be very okay. Lakini kwa wale wanasoma notes too, let them keep waiting na tutakutana kwa hizo mbili. Okay, so after next week, the other week there will be a CAT. Na hapo ndio kidogo utaona changamoto zitaanzia. So don't worry on their behalf. You attend classes, mambo iko sawa. You don't attend classes, you have a reason to worry. Okay. But it's scientifically proven that boiling substance at 100 degrees, the pathogens inside the substance will be killed. So how can anthrax be transmitted when the substance is boiled? Anthrax cannot be transmitted. We said that when you are disposing a carcass, you burn it. Burning will kill possibly the pathogen. But if you bury the animal without, especially in a shallow, you just dig a shallow hole and put in the animal. If it died from anthrax, then the Bacillus anthracis will still be in the animal. Okay, so you'll be polluting the environment. But if you burn the animal, okay, you don't roast it to eat, but you burn it. When you burn it, chances that you are also killing the pathogen are very high. So with the boiling, we are talking about the product, the milk, like in brucellosis. But for anthrax, the product, the Bacillus anthracis will be in the meat, most likely. Okay. So you don't boil. When someone drinks unboiled milk, and yes. When you drink unboiled milk, you can be infected. If one already have brucellosis, which can help can you offer? Go to hospital, utapatiwa dawa. Okay, go to hospital, utapatiwa dawa. What about when you drink yogurt? Yogurt is processed milk. Okay, so through the processing, we expect kwamba whatever causes the pathogen itakuwa imeuawa. Okay, so yogurt is processed milk, so it cannot have the brucellosis causing pathogen. Okay. Okay, can maziwa mala cause brucella? No. If I boil the affected meat, will I get the disease? No. You have to cook properly. Ulikuwa unaona tukisema mambo ya nyama, we were saying undercooked. Okay? Undercooked. So you have to cook properly. Cook the meat properly before you eat. What about those people who drink raw blood? If the animal that they are getting blood from has an infection, most likely they will also be infected. Okay? They'll most likely be infected. Okay. Okay. I think brucellosis is not contagious. Okay? It's not contagious. Can chicken also cause zoonotic diseases? Yes. If they have a disease in it, you eat it undercooked, then itakupatia hiyo ugonjwa. Yeah, I think we've gone through most of the questions. Sheldon, I've not seen you type the question you had. Juma Job, then EDS 00. Try to unmute. Try to unmute from your end and see if you can ask your question.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Doc. Good morning.
How about drinking packed milk, like the one bought from the shop without boiling? Most of the milk found on the shelves in shops, it's been tested through the Kenya Bureau of Standards. Wameona kwamba haina the bacteria ile inaweza sababisha ugonjwa. So when you are picking milk from a shop, from a supermarket, chances are that that particular milk has passed all the checks and balances. So it should be safe. Okay, it should be safe for consumption. Someone says that somebody told me that unboiled milk is first aid for someone who has taken poison drink. Is it true? At times it is, because usually what milk will do is either they are trying to initiate vomiting by giving that person milk, okay, so that they can initiate vomiting. But at times, there are some types of poison yenye unaambiwa don't initiate vomiting because hiyo poison itakuja kuharibu the throat. Okay, so it depends with which poison. Okay, it depends with which poison. But when someone is suspected kwamba amekunywa poison, maybe anapewa raw egg ama milk just to try and initiate vomiting. Okay. Okay, what is the significance of the incubation period in a rabies transmission and how does it impact public health strategies? So incubation, I think you mean by the time you are bitten until the virus now is present in the fluid ya huyo mtu. The biggest problem with the rabies ni kwamba you can only be of help to someone if the rabies virus haijaenda ikaingia kwa central nervous system. Okay, so you can only treat within, I think, a day or two. After that, the virus will have entered the central nervous system and no drug can reach the virus. Okay, so with the rabies, the earlier you go to hospital, the better. Okay, once the virus is still present in the normal, it's not gotten into your central nervous system, then the drugs, the treatment that is given can help. But once it gets into the CNS, the central nervous system, no treatment can be done to help. So ukisuspect kwamba umeumwa na umbwa na haujui kama hiyo umbwa iko na shida, kama imekuwa vaccinated, just go for treatment. Because ukingoja na ugundue baadaye, kuna uwezekano kwamba the virus will have entered your central nervous system, then you cannot deal with it. So, how do mutations in pathogens contribute to the emergence of new zoonotic diseases in humans? Okay, whenever there is a mutation, then the type of pathogen might also change because a mutation is a change in the genetic sequence. So mutations lead to the creation of new pathogens. Once the pathogen is new, then it means you also need a new way to combat that pathogen. So kama kuna dawa ilikuwa inatumika kutibu ugonjwa fulani, then hiyo pathogen has undergone a mutation, then most likely that drug will not work. So mutations are one of the major complications in the treatment of not only zoonotic diseases, but all diseases, not just in humans, but in all living organisms. So mutations, yes, they have a big impact. Okay. Okay, mostly they say that when pesticides are sprayed and the animals eat the vegetation, is that those heavy metals like lead are poisonous. What is the health risk to humans through milk and meat? Okay, very good question. What happens is when an animal is exposed to a pesticide or many of these heavy metals, at times they end up in the product. So they end up in milk, they end up in meat of this animal. So when someone is using that product, when someone is eating meat or milk from an animal that was exposed to a pesticide, that was exposed to any heavy metal, kuna uwezekano kwamba the heavy metal is present in the milk, is present in the meat. So by extension, then someone consuming that animal will also end up suffering the consequences. Okay. So it means then you have to be sure. That's why unaona in some European market walikuwa umekataa kwamba nyama kutoka in some African countries like Kenya cannot be exported just because of the type of drugs zenye wanyama wanatibiwa nazo, because wakitibiwa na hiyo dawa, the product, as the drug is broken down, some zinabaki kwa nyama, some of them zinabaki kwa maziwa. So anybody eating the meat, anybody using the milk is still likely to be affected by the product of that particular drug that was used to treat the animal. So that's why at some point there was a regulation wakaban a lot of the pesticides because zinakuja zinaleta serious deposits, not only in the food but also in the environment, kwa maji na kila mahali. So after you've used the pesticide, yes, you want to ensure that the plant haiumizwi na the disease. But if the chemical in the pesticide nayo inakuwa na even a more serious impact in the environment, then it is now not even healthy to use that particular pesticide. So the use of pesticides leads to a pollution of the environment. Once the environment is polluted, then the animals can suffer as a result. Then people who rely on, and we as human beings, when you eat the meat or you drink the milk, you are likely to suffer from that pollution. Okay? Okay. I'll need to stop there. Okay, I'll answer this from my sister Diana Chepiatich. Those who are pastoralists, the Rift Valley, you found most drink unboiled milk. Diseases like brucella and other is high. How can people help or advise so that they can afford to have good health at all? So one, they just need to avoid drinking the unboiled milk. That's one. Then two, they can try to do the surveillance, okay, the monitoring, because it's not that when you take any milk that is unboiled utakuwa na ugonjwa. If you are taking unboiled milk yet the animal had the infection, hapo ndio utapata ugonjwa. So if you have animals that are healthy, even if you use the unboiled milk, kuna uwezekano kwamba hautapata hiyo ugonjwa. So hawa watu wasitumie maziwa ambayo haijachemshwa, na pia wahakikishe kwamba wanyama wao, that is now the county government, they need to ensure that there is enough veterinary service so that animals zisikuwe na ugonjwa, alafu watu wakitumia hiyo maziwa pia wasipate ugonjwa. Okay, sawa. My people, we need to stop there. Okay? So for sure, we finish classes next week. Okay? I promise you that we'll have our last lecture next week. Okay? So allow me to leave. Thank you for coming. Sharon, you are welcome. And let's meet again next week for our last lecture. Okay? Thank you. Allow me to leave. So let's meet again next week. Asante.
Kwa ngoja hii ewa maana sitaki kusikia nyepesi. Okay, utafanya tu hivi, wanakimbiza